Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For 30 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. This month, we will focus on protecting the rights of immigrants. The current regime in Washington, D.C. is seriously attacking the human rights and the legal rights of immigrants in a number of ways. Fortunately, many people nationwide and locally are aware and are organizing in very good ways. During this hour, we will learn a lot from three guests who know a lot about immigrant rights and are working hard personally to protect those rights in very practical, hands-on ways. The news keeps changing continuously, so when you watch this TV program, there might have been changes since we taped the program on April 18, 2017. But much of what we say during this hour is very stable over time as background, and then you can keep in touch beyond that. Three guests will help us explore this topic. All three are very active with the local Olympia effort called Strengthening Sanctuary, which protects immigrant rights. I'm very happy to welcome Joanna Bryan. She is multicultural and bilingual with one parent from Mexico and the other from European heritage, and she works professionally as a translator. Good to have you here, Joanna.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Eder Núnez came to Oregon with his family when he was 10 years old. He and his siblings have excelled in school here, and he also is a U.S. military veteran. Eder, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Glenn.
Steffani Powell has been an immigration attorney for 25 years. She represents persons from all over the world. Since the November 16 election, she has also volunteered much time and professional expertise to help protect people's rights. Good to have you here, Steffani. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's important for us to start out this hour with the traditional American principle that says the United States has always been proud to be a nation of immigrants. In fact, the very first immigrants came here 10,000 years ago across the land bridge from Siberia and down through Alaska. Inscribed on the base of the Statue of Liberty is the poem from Emma Lazarus. It affirms that we actively invite and welcome both immigrants and refugees. The Statue of Liberty's inscription says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Well, that's a good place to start, I think. This work that we do for immigrant rights is really the best part of American tradition. So I appreciate the work you're doing. Steffani, when we were on the phone preparing for this interview, some of the things you said reflected that kind of a spirit. And I wonder if you could express the value you hold.
Well, if we're not a country of indigenous people, the story of indigenous people, the story of immigrants, what are we? That is what our country is.
Anything else from you or others? We have others that...
Well, I can speak to my own personal experience as an immigrant. I'm an immigrant to this country. I was born in Mexico, in the state of Jalisco, where Guadalajara is. That's the second largest city in Mexico. I grew up speaking only Spanish until the age of 10. That's when I, along with the rest of my family, took the journey north. So it was a long drive, and then we had to wait a couple of days at the border before the opportunity presented itself for us to make the crossing and experience a radical culture shift that forever changed the course of my life. It was incredibly challenging at first, being in the experience of being a child immigrant, but it makes a lot of sense now, not that I know more about life, and I'm very grateful for the experience now, but to speak more about the experience as it was then, My father was a immigrant worker who came and went back and forth from Mexico to the States, and so at a certain point in his work, he found steady work with a good man who owns a lot of hazelnut orchards down in the state of Oregon, and so my dad is a bit of a handyman. He knows how to do a little bit of everything. And so once his new boss found out about those skills, he asked him to remain and work for him exclusively, and that if he was willing to do so, he would provide housing so he could bring his family. And so my father understood that that was a unique opportunity to give us the chance at a better future, so we could have a better access to an education, something he never had, and he always dreamed he could provide for us, which would be very difficult given his background in Mexico at the time.
I wish more people in this country could hear real firsthand stories and develop the warmth and the affinity for the people who have come here to this country and have these stories to share. I thank you for sharing that.
I'm happy to share it. I believe that our family has had a wonderful overall experience as an immigrant family. My sister and one of my brothers, they are both CPAs down in Oregon. They're accountants. I am about to finish up my own studies at the Evergreen State College here in Olympia. And my youngest sibling, the only one who was born here in the States, he was the first Hispanic valedictorian at his high school of about 2000. And he is now studying theoretical chemistry at Oberlin College with a Fulbright scholarship. He's definitely a success story, and I think the rest of us are to some degree as well. And we've had a lot of opportunities and a lot of breaks and a lot of support through this journey. So one specific instance of that is a program called Upper Bound, which is a program that is geared towards potential first-generation college students. And it's a wonderful program that kind of sets the tone and the experience as a high schooler of experiencing higher education as a summer program. And that really set the tone for the rest of us to kind of follow in the footsteps. And so really thankful for those opportunities, really thankful for the welcoming community that has been the Northwest then and now. And I love it. I love the fact that I'm bicultural in a sense, and that I've had the experience of growing up here in the Northwest.
Great, thanks. And you have your own family firsthand experience.
Yes, my dad is from the U.S. of just white guy, and my mom is from Mexico, and her family is like kind of from all over the place. A lot of European descent, but not entirely. And I grew up spending much more time with my mom's family than my dad's family, and I was raised speaking Spanish, and that feels really relevant to, I think that my experience of feeling between two cultures, both the United States and Mexico, is very different than many, especially given that I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and having Mexican heritage is not something that was like people would often recognize. But I think that it played a really big part in my growing up, and now I work as an interpreter, mostly a medical interpreter, and having a lot of engagement with folks who live and work in this country and are Spanish speaking but don't speak English, and seeing the myriad of lives that people lead. I think, you know, talking before about the strengths of the United States, I think that one of the things we have is such a diversity of stories and experiences, and how I think one of the sad things about media portrayal of immigrants is like a stereotypical immigrant is that's a very like one-dimensional story. And I think as Eder was sharing his own story, it goes like way beyond that. And getting to hear people's stories in my work and getting to support them and getting the medical care they need, but then also seeing the struggles that they're dealing with is a lot of what led me to do this work.
Yeah. I mentioned to at least one of you I know on the phone when we were preparing for the program, that the immigrant experience is very much a part of my family. In 1900, nobody that I was related to was in this country yet. Everybody in my family, all four of my grandparents came after the year 1900. None of my four grandparents spoke any English. None of them had any money. And they came here, but they were white, and they came from a Northern European area, Norway and Sweden, and they were able to settle in, and once their kids went to school, my parents went to school and learned English. They started out at home learning, speaking Norwegian and Swedish, but when they went to school, then they did that, and then their parents learned, and they settled in, and it was easier for them because they were white and had a Northern European background. It's much harder for somebody who maybe generations later looks like they still don't belong.
Right.
And so, but the immigrant stories from my grandparents are very much a part of my family culture that we really value a lot. I want to see if we can look at the background behind the current immigration issues. Eder, can you tell us something about why people have been coming to the U.S., not just right now, but before as well?
Yes, Glenn, I'd be happy to. Based on my experience and what I know and what I've experienced firsthand, there's been a long history of policy making and engagement with the countries in Latin America in particular by the U.S. government that have been instrumental in creating conditions where a lot of people have felt the necessity to immigrate. So in certain instances, there's been elections where governments that, for political reasons, we consider unfriendly, socialist governments perhaps. We've had the need, I guess, as a country to kind of step in and deal with that in a way.
Not as a country, but as a government.
As a government, I should say. Thank you for correcting me.
That stuff.
Important distinction. And so there's been a long history of that. More recently, economic policies, particularly NAFTA, has been impactful in Mexico in particular. So with the Mexican crisis in the mid-90s, that's around the time NAFTA kicked in. And so what we saw was a huge influx of immigration from indigenous Mexican communities in the southernmost part of Mexico, mostly. And that was because once NAFTA kicked in, it became nearly impossible for a lot of them to survive in the subsistence way that they had been doing for centuries and millennia. And so that has forced a lot of the more recent migration. At this point, most of the migration from Mexico is actually negative migration, which is something most people don't know. The vast majority of the migration is from Central and South America, Central America in particular, which is undergoing a pretty serious social crisis.
And again, countries where the United States has just beaten the crap out of the people, and economically as well as politically, and in terms of physical dangers, and people have to get out.
That's been the history.
So,
it's not really.
Steffani, I wonder if you could tell us just briefly how immigration realities and issues and policies evolved during President Obama's administration.
Well, President Obama had a difficult time because he didn't have a Congress that would work with him to pass immigration reform. So he did what he could behind the scenes. One of the things that he did was he permitted spouses of U.S. citizens to file for waivers of inadmissibility in the United States rather than being forced to leave the United States and maybe stay out 15 months to get a decision, and if denied, stay out 10 years. So he did a policy change where the waivers of inadmissibility could be filed in country. The second thing he did was he placed young immigrants in what we call kind of a bubble of protection, deferred action for childhood arrival, where he said, okay, enough deporting all these young people who are in high school or in college, who have all these opportunities, these bright futures. Let's put them in a bubble of protection for 2 years until Congress could pass immigration reform. So about 752,000 recipients of DACA are currently in the United States, about 17,000 in the state of Washington alone. And these individuals have a work permit that's good for 2 years, renewable every 2 years, Social Security number, and some protection from deportation. However, if they commit crimes, if they have a felony, a significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors, they could lose that status. So under Obama, we had the provisional waiver change from out of the country, in the country. We had DACA passed as a temporary protection for young individuals in the country. And we also had the hope of deferred action for parental accountability that, as we all know, was squashed when the Supreme Court split their decision and decided not to lift the injunction. So Obama was doing as much as he could behind the scenes within his power without congressional support.
And what are people experiencing now?
Ooh. All right, so
take a deep breath for that one.
Right. So the other thing that President Obama did was he created deportation priorities. So individuals who had felonies, significant misdemeanors such as DUIs or domestic violence, 3 or more misdemeanors, criminal gang activity, those individuals were prioritized for deportation. If an immigration officer came across an individual that wasn't on that priority list, that individual could be released. If the officer arrested that individual, the immigration judge could administratively close the case and not pursue deportation because they weren't a priority. Well, in January of 2017, Trump issued one of his executive orders that said, we no longer have priorities. There are 11 million people in the country without proper documents. They are the priority. So he undid the provisions that Obama had provided to the immigrant community with that executive order. And now a massive expansion of enforcement priorities is taking place.
And that's polarizing for the community. I know during the campaign and since, Trump has been projecting a lot of fear and hatred and animosity and divisiveness, and that's just corrosive for a nation. It's just
absolutely,
you just can't do that. Some years ago, I produced 2 previous one-hour programs on immigration issues for this TV series, and in those cases, we spent most of the time addressing the myths and misconceptions that the public has, and looking ahead toward federal legislation that would solve these problems legislatively, and that has receded now far into the background. So we've got to meet a lot of urgent needs first before we can make up for all that lost background that we've lost.
Absolutely.
Joanna, when we were preparing for this program by the phone conversation, you mentioned our nation's escalating rhetoric of fear and divisiveness. Can you talk about that, either during the 2016 campaign or since?
Yeah, I think first it's important to recognize that as a country, I think there's both a long history of fear and hatred and racism and oppression, and at the same time there is a really strong history of people working together to overcome those things. And I think that as we have witnessed throughout the presidential campaign, and now that the Trump administration is in office, the ways in which that rhetoric has just like exponentially increased and has become so prevalent. And I think that the language of hatred and racism and fear and divisiveness has become really normalized. And sexism and so many other things has become really normalized. And I think that it's really important that we fight against that, because I think that often that rhetoric is used to pit people against each other who otherwise might actually have more in common than they think. Even though, you know, our stories are very different, might have more in common than we think. And we are often can find shared values. And I think it's important to find those shared values and work against that divisiveness, because what it does is that, you know, I mean, I think that a common thing in, for example, that in you know, rhetoric from the Trump administration, for example, is that the immigrants are an enemy, you know? And I think that having that keeps people from seeing in the ways in which a variety of, like, a huge diversity of immigrants are their neighbors and friends and family members and community members, and that strength is really, really vital and important as a nation and in our communities.
Oppressors commonly use this divide and conquer thing as a way to pit people against each other and keep the people on the bottom,
Right.
and keep them in the southern part of the United States for a long, long time. The white economic elites used racism to keep white working class people and black working class people apart,
Right.
and they imposed very low wages on everybody, but the whites, instead of fighting back against economic injustice, the whites were told your enemy is the people below you, the black people, and that just kept the white oppressors in charge.
Right.
And this just gets used over and over again in all kinds of oppressive systems.
And I think it's important to recognize that even though they're not publicized, there are tons of examples. Like, for example, during the civil rights time, it was never publicized, but there are tons of examples of white working class folks working alongside Black Panther members or folks working for civil rights, black folks working for civil rights, and many other examples of, like, cross-cultural connections that we need to remember and continue.
That's right. That needs to be affirmatively lifted up and help people remember that. Please.
I think this is a great time to commend the state of Washington, both the Attorney General and Governor Inslee, and the Olympia City Council.
And we'll cover that in a moment.
Immediately, let's just talk about Governor Inslee's executive order where he wanted to counter this hateful, negative rhetoric coming from the federal government. And in his executive order, he opens with saying something like Washington is a state that is inclusive, tolerant, compassionate, and that 1 in 7 Washingtonians are immigrants. 1 million people. So I felt very thankful that he passed the executive order, that he used that language to counter the negative rhetoric coming from the federal authorities.
That's really important for people like that to speak up. And I have a note about that. This is the February 23rd, 2017 Executive Order 17-01. And he said that in 2014, immigrants contributed over $2.4 billion in state and local taxes. And in 2012, undocumented immigrants paid over $300 million in state and local taxes. If all the undocumented immigrants were removed from the state would lose $14.5 billion in economic activity, $6.4 billion in gross revenue, and approximately 71,000 jobs. So this is an important part of our economy, as well as the humane values of inclusiveness.
Absolutely.
So it's clear to me, at least, and perhaps to others, that Trump and his appointees have just flat out lied about a number of realities, and they've exploited some underlying fears and racism. Do you have anything to say about the fear and the racism that's been out there lately in that level?
Just to kind of echo what Joanna has already said, it's sad to see that this country that I've experienced as very welcoming from my personal experience has taken this sort of a turn, and so I'm fascinated by the why this has come about, and studying it and learning why. But I think language is very important, and so as we deal with the new reality of the misuse of language at the macro level, at the level of our government, I think it's important to recognize our own individual use of language and ideas, and how we can help kind of confront that, if you will, or kind of do our part in lessening the impact of that by helping spread the positive message in our own personal circles.
On the Olympia FOR's website, and I'll mention this later on in the program, we'll have on the TV programs part of olympiafor.org, we'll have information summarizing the things that you've said, and I'll also work into that some additional information that we did not have time to cover. And one thing I want to be able to note there is actual facts about the very low rates of crimes committed by immigrants, in contrast to Trump's lies that, there are a bunch of murders and rapists. No, their rate of crime is way below ordinary people. So we'll cover some of this additional material on the website. I'm especially concerned about the hypocrisy of refusing to accept refugees from Syria. And this, again, just like what our government has done to Latin America that makes people have to leave there for safety. We've been bombing the crap out of Syria, making it impossible for people to live there in safety. They need to get out just to save their lives, and then the United States won't allow them to come here. And I think even little kids are taught by their parents, you clean up your mess. And yet our government bombs the crap out of these countries, creates all kinds of refugees, and then refuses to take the refugees in. I think we need to have Congress pass a law that prohibits the United States from bombing any country or attacking that country until we agree in advance that we'll take in whatever refugees our military violence has caused.
Well, it makes me think that the rhetoric of this administration and many prior administrations about feeling sympathy or not wanting loss of civilian lives in other countries where the U.S. government is causing war, it just totally takes the value out of that, because they just are empty words when refugees are refused.
I have something else for Steffani. As soon as Trump took power in January of 2017, he started taking these reckless actions to change federal policies, as you mentioned, issued some executive orders like a travel ban that the federal judges stopped, but and that actually provoked good people to come out to airports and protest against Trump's travel ban and affirm human rights for everybody. Can you tell us about another executive order, Steffani, about situations inside the United States?
So his Interior Enforcement Executive Order that was later implemented by a memorandum massively expands removal priorities. So I mentioned earlier that under Obama, we had removal priorities. If you were a felon, had a significant misdemeanor such as a DUI, domestic violence, 3 misdemeanors, or criminal gang activity, you were a priority, all right? So there was prosecutorial discretion where if an immigration officer came across you, they could let you go if you weren't a priority. If they did arrest you, a judge could administratively close your case if you weren't a priority. Well, under the executive order that was released in January, there are no longer priorities. 11 million people are the priority. So they've criminalized unlawful status in the United States. It is not a crime to be unlawful in the United States. There are many reasons that people become undocumented in the United States. It is not a crime. So he has, in essence, criminalized 11 million people and made them the priority. The other thing he has done in the executive order and the memorandum implementing the executive order is change the definition of criminal. So we think of criminal as someone who's gone through the system and been convicted. Under this executive order and the memorandum, a criminal under President Trump is someone who has been convicted or someone who has been arrested, right, and has not gone through the criminal justice process, or someone who the immigration officer thinks has committed the elements of a crime. So those are criminals. So when he says, I'm going to deport 3 million criminals, those are the people he's talking about.
Yeah,
right?
In our system, you're supposed to be innocent until you've been proven guilty in a court of law with actual due process.
I'm afraid that doesn't apply to immigrants.
Yeah, so he's just throwing out that basic sense of due process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Under that executive order, he also wants to bring 287G agreements and secured communities back. So 287G agreements are where the federal authorities deputize local law enforcement to perform immigration authority duties, for instance, arresting people for being in the country unlawfully or without proper documents. Secured communities are where the law enforcement, jails notify Immigration and Customs Enforcement when someone is going to be released from the law enforcement system. So he's bringing back programs that were constitutionally questionable at the time, but he's encouraging involvement in these programs once again by state and local authorities.
And of course, a lot of people are resisting these injustices. I wonder if you could tell us just briefly about at the Northwest Detention Center, which is a privately owned, profit-making prison in the Tacoma Tide Flats, built on a toxic waste area, where a private corporation is imprisoning a lot of people. Tell us the protests there.
So On April 10th, detainees started a hunger strike to protest the terrible conditions in the detention center. And this is not something that's new. Detainees went on a hunger strike in 2014. And we know that conditions under Obama were far from great. The detention center was already over capacity. There were food issues. There were people weren't receiving enough medical care, et cetera. But the information that supporters have gotten from detainees is that has drastically gotten much worse under Trump. And so starting on April 10th, 100 detainees started going on hunger strike, and as of right now, April 18th, my understanding is that there are over 750 detainees now on hunger strike, and they're also employing a work stoppage. And a lot of what they're demanding is better conditions on a basic level. So like being able to wash their uniforms with actual soap and water, better food quality and better food amounts, more access to health care, currently folks who are working in the Northwest Detention Center are being paid $1 a day, and all of the work that we're doing goes towards running the facilities. And so Geo Group, which is the private company that runs the Northwest Detention Center, is far profiting off of the labor of the people who are in this detention center. And additionally, people are demanding much more speedy trials, because often people are held in the detention center for months or even years. And there's a lot of work. There's an organization that is based out of Tacoma called Northwest Detention Center Resistance that has been doing a lot of work in support with folks detained in the detention center for many years. It is organized primarily by immigrants and undocumented folks, and they part of what they're doing to support the hunger strike is that they are having folks outside of the detention center 24 hours a day while this is going on. And so these sort of direct connections by the people that are directly affected are things that we really need to stay connected on. Yeah.
And people probably need to get access through non-traditional media. I would not
definitely
count on mainstream commercial media to
let
you know what's going on. You have to tap into these nonprofit groups or alternative
exactly.
media.
And it's great to follow a lot of these local groups and see on the ground what they're doing.
Yeah, I want to affirm the work that you folks and a bunch of other folks locally are doing through an Olympia-based strengthening sanctuary group, and in communities across the nation, including Olympia, all kinds of people, immigrants and students and members of religious faith communities and local government officials, all kinds of people of goodwill have risen up and organized themselves to protect the rights of immigrants, including immigrants who don't have documentation. Joanna, could you tell us something about the Olympia Strengthening Sanctuary group?
Yeah, so the group started with a small number of folks who pushed for the sanctuary measure to be pushed through the City of Olympia City Council.
The resolution.
Yes, and afterwards those folks met and thought, well, this is really great, but like, what do we do next? We want to make sure that this ordinance is actually followed, and we want to follow through and see what we can continue to do, because we know that this isn't the end of the line. Yeah. And so I think most of us joined in December, and since then it's been growing really quickly, and I think I'm not sure how many people involved at this point.
25, 30.
Yeah.
And new people come to each meeting.
Yeah.
So it's growing.
And
various subcommittees doing various efforts. Spearheading various efforts.
You want to speak a little bit about that?
Right. So actually, case in point, we're participating in a subcommittee that is dedicated to faith community outreach, and so we are working on creating a framework for helping channelize a lot of that energy and a lot of that potential and a lot of that enthusiasm that we are seeing from a lot of the faith communities here locally, especially those that are part of the Interfaith Works your network in town. And so we're very excited about that energy and having that conversation with them and seeing the various ways that their specific communities want to help. There's something for everyone to do.
Right.
And so it's just a matter of having the appropriate framework for all those, for that energy to come together.
Right. And the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation, whose TV program this is, endorsed the follow-up statement from the Olympia City Council resolution calling for some clear implementation. Because it's one thing for a local government to say, okay, we'll pass this resolution, now we're done with it.
Right.
And it's another thing to say, we're going to pass this resolution and we're going to follow through and make sure the good stuff happens.
That's right. And there was a particular council member who came to us and said, please keep this going.
Yeah.
Make sure it has teeth.
Yeah, so we've had some really very good Olympia City Council members.
Absolutely.
And that's been just crucial. So it's encouraging to see people of goodwill come forth from different sectors. Can you summarize just briefly what the City of Olympia Sanctuary Resolution says and what it could mean in actual practice?
So the Governor's Executive Order and the City of Olympia Resolution kind of mirror each other. And basically, it says that city officials or government state actors are not going to target and apprehend individuals based on their immigration status. So they're not going to perform the work of federal immigration authorities. The second thing is they're not going to ask. It's kind of a don't ask, don't tell. They're not going to ask about immigration status when an individual in our community, let's say, calls the fire department. You know, they need assistance from the fire department. The fire department, as a city entity, is not going to ask about immigration status before a service is offered. So wherever it's not required by state or federal law, they're not going to ask, right? And this was an important message to send to the immigrant community because they're hearing all of this negative, hateful rhetoric from the federal government. And I want to point out that in 2015 and 16, we had people coming forward, coming to immigration attorney offices, accredited representatives, ready to file for deferred action for parental accountability. There were about 4 million people in the country that were eligible for what we'll call DAPA. And these were parents of U.S. citizens. So they were coming forth. They were gathering all their evidence.
An adult who is in this country, their child is born here.
Absolutely.
The child becomes a U.S. citizen because
Absolutely.
they were born here.
That's right.
The way it works.
That's right.
But the parent still does not have
status. So they were, under Obama, they were preparing to come forward and apply for something similar to DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This was Deferred Action for Parental Accountability. So these individuals were coming forward, gathering documents, meeting with attorneys, very excited. I mean, it was an incredible time to be an immigration attorney and finally feel like you could help your community, right? And then, bam. Not only was it, the Supreme Court split their decision and decide not to lift the injunction, then we had Trump. We had President Trump elected. So all these people that were coming forward quickly receded into the margins of society. So the Olympia City Council resolution, the Governor's executive order were very important and timely messages to send to the immigrants in our community. Don't go there, stay with us. We're here for you. People care about you. We will do everything we can to honor and protect you.
And it's important for somebody who is legally vulnerable to have a sense of safety, because if you're assaulted by somebody,
Absolutely.
if your house is broken into by somebody,
Absolutely.
do you dare call the police or do you
Absolutely.
not call the police? And you know, if you're going to have a safe community, people need to feel safe in calling the police to report a crime.
Absolutely.
Or to serve as a witness. If some crime is committed and you saw what happened, your role as a witness is important. But if you're afraid to step forward, injustice occurs.
Right.
And the Trump administration is promoting injustice by making it hard and dangerous for people to interact positively with law enforcement agencies.
Absolutely.
Or other governmental entities
Absolutely.
of whatever kind.
Right. You're absolutely correct.
Food safety regulations in
Yes.
a restaurant, who knows? It could be anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you go to a restaurant, under Trump, your food is less safe because somebody might feel afraid to blow the whistle on unsafe food practices that the management is imposing upon them when the
Right.
employee might want to have the food be safe. I mean, there's all kinds of
Oh,
ripple
absolutely.
effects. The Trump fear-mongering and hatred and oppression is just dangerous for the entire society,
Absolutely.
not just immigrants.
Right.
Really, if I
Absolutely.
could, a particular and very sad aspect of this is the fear, going back to the fear and the anxiety that this has generated within the community has been just debilitating. It's been, it's the amount of anxiety that I've seen from the community in my interactions with them and some of the community work we've been able to do. It's very difficult to hear about, you know, the parents have been so afraid that they're afraid to send their children to school, you know, afraid to go grocery shopping because of the amount. Unfortunately, most of the immigrant community tends to get their news either, you know, word of mouth from others, and a lot of them get them from like national networks that are usually reporting on other areas, other regions outside of what may be happening in Washington State.
Yeah.
And so these are things to consider within that. So
Yeah.
part of our work has been in addressing the situation as we have it here in Washington, right? Letting people know about the rest, the state
Executive Order, the
executive
governor's
order,
executive
exactly,
order,
and the city of Olympia,
Yeah.
and our various work with the local authorities.
And I appreciate the work that you folks are doing, your Strengthening Sanctuary group, with local law enforcement agencies, trying to get them to not cave into the Trump pressure, but to do what they can to not ask, not pry, you know. So that's been important work. And I know you folks have been doing Know Your Rights training, because ordinary people who are vulnerable need to know what their rights are. Because again, if you listen just to the crap that comes out of D.C., you think you don't have any rights. Well, we do. Everybody has constitutional rights if you're here, not just citizens, but everybody who's here has constitutional rights. People need to know that. And you folks have been doing Know Your Rights training. You've all been involved with that, and some other folks as well. And when we post this TV program for people to watch on the website, and we post a very thorough summary of what you folks have said, we also will post a link for some Know Your Rights trainings that have occurred elsewhere, so people can tap into that and see the role plays of like how somebody gets tricked into saying what country they're from when you don't need to talk to somebody without an attorney, or get tricked into something because the immigration people will find ways to deceive people to try to spill the beans on something, you know. And so the Know Your Rights is just crucial work, and I'm glad you folks have been doing these trainings throughout the community. Folks can look around for different publicity and different ways to tap into that. Another thing that's a danger is these emergencies are going to be coming up where all of a sudden somebody in the community is picked up. And when an emergency occurs, people are gearing up in different communities around the nation to do some emergency rapid response kinds of things. How might that work? It's being worked on here, so we don't have the plans yet. But who could say more about just the sense of what might be needed for that?
There's a group up in Seattle called the Washington State Immigrant Solidarity Network, and they've created a template for a raid response team that ideally we would see them, every region would have its own team. And so part of that work is the creation of a hotline that is getting ready to go live here in, early next month.
So
and
early in May of 2017 in Olympia.
And this hotline is asking for volunteers who are proficient in Spanish and other languages to be able to be on call for various, for people to be able to report the activities of these federal agencies.
Yeah.
And so that will be an important step into reacting to potential raids or potential activity, and then summoning a team that can be there, be present during the activity, and that can be able to provide either legal support, moral support, health, medical support, mental health support care. And so there's also an app is being developed that is
An app?
An app,
For like these little phones that I don't have and don't understand.
Exactly, for smartphones.
Whatever those things are. Yeah.
Right, and it will be, it will allow just about anyone who gets registered to be able to tap into it and document whatever activity they're witnessing.
And I'm glad you mentioned languages other than Spanish, because although we've been talking well, the two of you are fluent in Spanish, but people need to realize this pertains to people from other parts of the world, Asia and
Africa.
All kinds of places. You know, you could be a French-speaking immigrant from Africa. You could be Cambodian-speaking. You could be, I mean, there's all kinds of languages. So there's a place for everybody.
Another rapid response effort that we have in the States. So the American Immigration Lawyers Association has trained immigration attorneys to respond to workplace raids. So for instance, myself and others have been trained that in our area, if there's a workplace raid, we are to go there and try to lock people's jurisdiction into Washington State, so that if there's a massive detention effort, sometimes they'll send people to different states, right, where they're away from their families, the evidence, the support network that they need. So it will be important for immigration attorneys to go, to have them sign these particular forms to lock their jurisdiction into Washington State. So they've created this another element of the rapid response that will be necessary.
When we were preparing for the program and talking on the phone, Joanna, you mentioned that sometimes the media tries to be divisive between the good immigrants and the bad ones, those eligible for the DACA thing versus those not eligible for that. And can you tell us something about that kind of a approach?
I think it pertains really directly to what Steffani was mentioning earlier about how Trump's rhetoric has changed the definition of what criminal is, and you know, in his executive order, he's trying to change the definition of what criminal is, and that oftentimes the way that immigrants, especially immigrants without documents, are represented in the media is often there is an attempt to divide communities and divide families, and part of that is by separating the bad immigrants, the ones who have some sort of criminal background, from the good immigrants, or separating, for instance, towards the end of, and I hope I'm getting the dates right, towards the end of Obama's administration, there was a push to get extra support for DACA students, which on the one hand is really excellent, but on the other hand, there was a large outcry from the immigrant community saying, like, hey, it's not only DACA students who deserve this, and in doing this, you're creating a lot of tension and a lot of division within our families. And so it's great for people to have that present in mind when they're watching mainstream media or something.
You see this a lot when you have a police shooting of an African-American person. The news coverage, instead of saying, holy crap, the police killed this guy, he was unarmed, he was not a criminal, whatever, they just killed this guy for no valid reason. Instead, the news media say, well, you know, this guy was no angel, he had a shoplifting case years before. So as a way of justifying a murder by the police officer because the guy had shoplifted or done something some years before.
Exactly.
It's like, what are they doing? What messages are they trying to send?
Right. Or the opposite, saying like, this shouldn't have happened because this person was a great whatever, which is excellent, but we shouldn't have to defend our character to
a star
keep
football
from
player.
Right, exactly.
So that's
it's
okay.
Like, even if he wasn't a star football player, it shouldn't have happened.
Same thing, right.
And given the expanding definition of what a criminal is, a lot of people are getting stopped or detained for a minor offense decades ago, or for example, and
So in watching and reading media, it's really good to have these kinds of critical sensitivities to see what's going on and how they tell the story. What are they doing here? What's going on underneath the surface?
Well, and like you were saying, going to the facts of like what criminal activity actually is in immigrant populations, which is really low, and much lower than non-criminal communities or non-immigrant communities. Sorry.
Right. So throughout the 30 years that I've been producing and hosting this TV series, a lot of our program topics have recognized that all people are really one human family. We really are all in this together. if you get down to what the humane reality of it is. And I want our nation to recognize this basic principle about immigration status as well. So whether you're here with documentation, without documentation, whatever, we're all human beings. Come on, let's get that together, okay? And I know that connects with your ethics of this as well. Can you add something to that?
Absolutely. I think that crisis presents opportunity, largely speaking. And so something I've seen from myself and from a lot of my peers around Trump's election has been a lot of questioning around ourselves, how we engage with the world and with each other, and the opportunities that are now present to engage more of ourselves, engage ourselves in a more full way, and have that reflect on our deeper values.
Yeah.
And so thanks to this circumstance / opportunity / crisis, I've been able to work with Joanna, I've been able to work with Steffani, and a lot of other wonderful people that I keep, and I keep meeting new ones almost daily around this issue. And so that's very heartening. And everyone's coming from a different background, from a different culture, but we're rallying around specific values of service, values of respect, values of human dignity.
Yeah.
Right. This is ultimately about human dignity, our own and that of our fellow brothers and sisters.
And I know that you've been working also with the religious community, different faith communities across the whole spectrum, really, of faith communities of different religions, and that's crucial because it's that grounding also in the really humane values that underlie the best of all the traditions.
Something to highlight, I'm sorry, in particular about that is so very heartening to see, for instance, the people from the Jewish temple showing up at the Muslim mosque in defense of around the various executive orders, the Muslim ban, right? So when that happened, that also happened, right?
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing that doesn't get us much, airtime on the mainstream media.
Right.
But it's stuff that is happening. It's very heartening.
Yeah, and those two communities have worked together with communication and mutual events and collaboration for several years locally, and I know this happens elsewhere as well. Steffani, we're kind of tight on time, but I wonder if you could lay out a couple of ways in which people watching this interview could help with any aspects of what you've been saying.
So, if you're interested, get involved with an organization such as Strengthening Sanctuary. Reach out to your neighbors that are immigrants. People who come to my office sometimes are often surprised that their non-immigrant neighbors have come over and brought flowers or food just to send a welcoming message. I think that's incredibly important right now. Also, attorneys. We need more volunteer attorneys to help with bond hearings. That's going to be a huge need.
Yeah.
There are very few immigration attorneys in the Olympia area.
So you're saying that other attorneys, or perhaps paralegals or other people who have some sense of how the law functions, could get briefed up on how to help out in some specific ways, even without knowing everything there is to know about immigration law.
Bond hearings, getting people out on bond will be crucial, because if they don't get out of bond, they're scheduling some hearings for 2021, 2022.
And then people are trapped in like the Northwest Detention Center, where they get horrible food, horrible health care, and mistreatment by
there will, if
guards.
Congress approves President Trump's request for $3 billion to build the wall, but also, most importantly, to build more detention centers, right, that will benefit these private prison companies, we will have how many millions of people detained? Millions of people?
A lot of, as I mentioned a moment ago, a lot of our conversations have been about people speaking Spanish, but people who have cultural ties with other nationalities, other languages, could have ways to help as well, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
And nonprofit groups that help in various ways. I know the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, is very, very good, and a bunch of different groups that work on specifics. And we'll be listing a lot of good nonprofit organizations and other resources and the Know Your Rights training links to watch those videos on our website. And so I will encourage people to visit www.olympiafor.org, click the TV programs link, and then scroll down to May 2016, and it'll stay there for years and years and years into the future. And click the Word document that's a summary of what we said. At the very end of that Word document will be a list of quite a number of resources, more than what we have time to list here, as well as some other facts that are relevant that we didn't have time to say during this hour. I really thank Joanna and Eder and Steffani for being our guests on the program. You shared a lot of substantive information and good heart. I always like to have guests who share good heart and positive attitudes, and you certainly did that, so thanks to all three of you.
Thank you.
I want to thank the folks who've been watching. We taped this interview on April 17, 2017, or excuse me, April 18, 2017. The news keeps changing continuously, so when you watch this TV program, there might have been some changes since then, but much of what we said during this hour will remain useful in the future, even if some of the specifics change. During the 2016 election season, and especially since January 2017, many kinds of people have been subjected to serious violations of their human rights and their constitutional rights and other kinds of abuse. That is not acceptable in a nation that has better values. People who are already vulnerable because of gender, religion, race, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, and other factors have been especially targeted for further abuse, and in some cases outright violence. That violates the spirit of what our nation is supposed to value. It is not acceptable. Decent Americans need to get informed and get active in pushing back nonviolently against the oppressive systems. Decent Americans need to remind other Americans and all levels of government and the media that our nation's values are better than that. I appreciate the good work that our guests for this interview are performing. We need more people to rise to the occasion and help bring our nation back from cruelty and injustice. You can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship for Reconciliation at 360-491-9093 or www.olympiafor.org. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs what you have to offer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.